On our wedding night, my husband said, "You're not one of us yet." I thought he was joking, but 6 months later, I realized he meant every word. My name is Rachel Miller. I am 27 years old, and I live in Chicago. For most of my life, I believed in love the way children believe in fairy tales. I thought marriage would mean belonging, safety, and a new beginning. When I met Trevor, he seemed to embody every promise of stability I had ever hoped for. He came from an old family with deep roots in the city, the kind of family that shook hands with judges, had their names on church plaques, and hosted Christmas parties with more silverware than I knew existed. Walking into their home for the first time, I felt like I had stepped into another world. The marble floors glistened, the chandeliers hummed with warm light, and everyone spoke with the kind of confidence you only hear from people who have never worried about bills. Trevor's mother embraced me politely, though her hug was brief, more formality than warmth. His father gave me a nod, his eyes scanning me the way someone scans a contract. Still, I told myself it was nerves, that I was the outsider walking into a legacy. The wedding itself was dazzling, almost surreal. White roses lined the aisles. A string quartet played music so delicate it seemed to float above us, and every detail screamed perfection. But I will never forget the moment we stepped away from the reception, just the two of us, still dressed in our vows. Trevor leaned close, his voice calm but firm, and said, "You are not one of us yet." I laughed. What else could I do? I thought he was teasing, that he meant I would soon be a daughter-in-law officially once papers and traditions caught up. I brushed it off, tucked it away like an oddity. But that sentence would echo louder and louder as months passed, until it became impossible to ignore. In those first few months, I tried desperately to prove myself. I cooked dinners, I attended every family gathering, I smiled until my cheeks ached. I wanted them to see me as Rachel, the woman Trevor loved, not just a new name added to their tree. But something was always off. His mother's eyes lingered a little too long when I poured wine. His sister smirked when I offered to help clean. His father asked about my grandmother's trust fund before he asked about my job. Every interaction felt like a test, and no matter how hard I studied, I was already failing. What unsettled me most was Trevor's silence. He never defended me when they made their sharp little comments. When I told him I felt unwelcome, he brushed it aside, saying, "That's just how they are. You'll get used to it." But why should I get used to being invisible in my own marriage? 6 months in, the pattern was undeniable. I wasn't just imagining things. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being isolated, piece by piece, meal by meal, smile by smile. And that night, when I lay awake beside Trevor, staring at the ceiling, I finally admitted to myself what I had been too afraid to say out loud. I had not married into a family. I had walked into a fortress. And in that fortress, I was not welcome. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten daughter. The first dinner, after the wedding, should have felt like a celebration of new beginnings. Instead, it felt like an initiation, a silent trial where I was already guilty. Trevor's family gathered around their long oak dining table, polished so bright I could see the reflection of my own anxious face staring back at me. Crystal glasses lined up like soldiers. Plates of steaming steak were placed one by one before each family member, their rich aroma filling the room. When the server reached me, she set down a small salad. No dressing, no bread, just lettuce leaves glistening under the light. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. I waited for Trevor to speak up, to laugh, to say, "You forgot her entree." But he didn't. He kept his eyes on his plate, cutting into his steak as if nothing were wrong. I forced a smile, my fork trembling slightly. As I tried to spear a leaf of lettuce, the sound in the room changed. Conversation slowed, laughter dimmed, and I realized people were watching. Not openly, not kindly, but the way people watch when they want to see if you will break. I leaned toward Trevor, whispering, "Why didn't I get what everyone else has?" He didn't even look at me. He muttered, "Not now, Rachel. Don't make a scene." The words stung worse than any silence. In that moment, I understood. He wasn't going to defend me. He wasn't going to stand between me and them. I was on my own. I kept chewing the bitter leaves, each bite harder to swallow, until I heard a soft laugh beside me. His sister, Amanda, leaned close, her perfume sharp, her voice quieter than a secret, but cruel enough to slice through my chest. "She'll learn her place," she whispered, just like the last one did. The last one. Her words echoed in my skull. Last one. My heart pounded. I wanted to ask, to demand an answer, but my throat tightened. I looked at Trevor. He still didn't glance at me. He didn't even flinch at his sister's words. And suddenly, the salad on my plate wasn't just food. It was a message. I was not one of them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I smiled tightly, forcing my hands to stay steady, forcing my voice to remain calm when I said, "It's delicious." I wanted to scream, but instead, I let them believe they had won that round. Because as Amanda's whisper rattled in my ears, one thought rooted itself deep in my mind. If there was a last one, then I wasn't the first woman they had tried to break. And if I wasn't the first, I wouldn't be the last, unless I found out exactly what happened to the woman who came before me. The whisper about the last one haunted me for weeks. It clung to me in quiet moments, when I folded laundry, when I washed dishes, when I lay awake at night beside Trevor's steady breathing. Who was the last one? What had happened to her? The question ate away at me, and though I tried to push it down, the answer seemed to creep closer on its own. It came up one evening during a casual Sunday dinner. We were gathered again at that long oak table, the same one where I had first been served nothing but salad. This time, the dishes were richer: roast chicken, buttered rolls, glistening vegetables arranged like a painting. But I had lost my appetite the moment Trevor's father cleared his throat and fixed his gaze on me. "So, Rachel," he said smoothly, "I hear your grandmother was quite the businesswoman. Left behind a trust fund, didn't she?" The words hit like ice water. I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. "Yes, it's in my name." He smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was sharp, knowing. 400,000, wasn't it? That's no small thing. Families like ours know how to protect assets like that. Before I could answer, Trevor's mother leaned in, her pearls catching the light. "We've been talking about updating your prenup. Just a formality, of course. It would protect Trevor, the family, the business, and naturally, it would ensure your grandmother's legacy is safe in the right hands." The right hands. My fingers tightened around my napkin. They were circling, like vultures around prey. I looked at Trevor, desperate for some sign of loyalty. He gave a small shrug, his eyes fixed on his plate. "It's normal," he murmured. "Just paperwork. Normal." But there was nothing normal about being asked to sign away control of my grandmother's life's work. My grandmother, who had built a small business from nothing, who had survived wars and recessions, who had always told me, "Rachel, money is not love. but it gives you freedom when others try to chain you. I smiled politely, the way I had learned to do when the family pressed me into corners. "I'll think about it," I said softly. But my stomach was burning. My instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. That night, when Trevor fell asleep, I tiptoed to his study. His laptop sat open on the desk, screen dim, but not locked. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was invasive. But when your life feels like it's slipping through your fingers, you grab at whatever you can hold. I scrolled through his emails, my heart pounding so loud, I was sure it would wake him. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Work messages, family chatter, receipts. And then I found it. An email thread between Trevor and his father. The subject line, "Moving assets once she's softened." My breath caught in my throat. I clicked it open, and the words blurred before me. Plans, dates, discussions about how I could be persuaded, how I could be brought around. Trevor's father wrote, "She will resist at first, but once she feels isolated enough, she will fold. They always do. They always do." I closed the laptop, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to scream, to shake Trevor awake and demand answers. But instead, I slipped back into bed, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully beside me. The man I married wasn't just silent. He was planning against me, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. After finding those emails, I couldn't look at Trevor the same way. Every word he spoke, every glance he gave me, felt rehearsed, calculated. He would smile and ask about my day, but in the back of my mind, I could still see his father's words, "She will fold once she's softened." I didn't want to fold, but I didn't know how much more isolation I could take. One evening, Trevor came home late. He smelled faintly of hay, like the barn his family kept on their property outside the city. When I asked where he had been, he brushed me off. "Just helping Amanda with something," he said. Amanda, his cousin. She lived not far from us, in a little house his parents had given her. Amanda was sharp-tongued, always smirking at me, like she knew secrets I didn't. Still, hearing her name so casually on Trevor's lips made something twist in my gut. A few nights later, unable to quiet the suspicion, I decided to follow him. I parked my car down the road and walked across the damp grass toward the family barn. My shoes sank into the earth, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, I saw them, Trevor and Amanda. They stood close, too close. He leaned toward her, his voice low, his hand brushing hers, as though they were conspiring over something dangerous. Amanda's laugh was soft, sharp, almost triumphant. I pressed myself against the wood, straining to hear. Words floated out in fragments. Fund, trust, papers. My chest tightened. It wasn't just my imagination. They were talking about me. Then I saw it. The thin chain around Amanda's neck glimmered in the low barn light. At first, I couldn't place it, but then my breath caught. I knew that necklace. It had belonged to my grandmother. I remembered packing it carefully into my jewelry box after the wedding. A simple gold chain with a delicate pearl pendant. Nothing extravagant, but priceless to me because it was hers. A week after, I had gone to wear it and found it missing. I assumed I had misplaced it, or maybe it had fallen somewhere in the house. But now, here it was, resting on Amanda's collarbone as though it had always been hers. My vision blurred with anger. How had she gotten it? Did Trevor give it to her? Did she steal it from my box? And more than that, why was she wearing it so boldly, as if to taunt me? I wanted to storm in, to rip the necklace from her throat and demand answers. My body shook with the urge to confront them, right there, to end the charade. But something inside me, some instinct, held me back. If I walked in now, they would have excuses ready. They would twist the truth, laugh it off, make me look paranoid. If they were bold enough to wear my grandmother's necklace and whisper about my trust fund, then they were bold enough to do worse. I needed proof, undeniable proof, before I made a move. I stepped back into the night, my breath shallow, my fists clenched. The barn faded into the distance behind me, but Amanda's mocking laugh seemed to follow me all the way home. That night, lying awake in the dark, I asked myself a question I still struggle with. Would you confront them right there? Or would you stay silent to expose the entire family's game? The Sunday dinners never stopped. Week after week, I returned to that oak table, trying to wear a mask of calm, while inside, I was unraveling. Each meal felt less like a family gathering and more like a ritual, a performance meant to remind me of my place. One evening, the ritual turned into something more sinister. Trevor's father stood with a glass of wine raised high, his deep voice echoing off the walls. To keeping what belongs to our bloodline, he declared. Everyone lifted their glasses. Crystal chimed in agreement. I lifted mine too, but my hand shook. I glanced around the table. Not one face questioned the words. Not one person hesitated. Trevor raised his glass with pride, his eyes catching mine for the briefest second. There was no apology in them, no shame, and in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about tradition. This was about my inheritance. They didn't want me. They wanted what I carried. Every instinct told me to leave, to pack my bags, to run to the police, to cut my losses before the game went further. I could have walked out of that house and never looked back, but something inside me resisted. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of my grandmother's words about freedom. Or maybe it was the quiet rage that came from being dismissed, silenced, and treated like nothing. So I stayed. I know people will say I should have left right then, that no amount of inheritance was worth the danger of staying under their roof, sitting at their table. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was foolish. But I couldn't bear the thought of walking away without exposing them first. If I left, they would move on to the next woman, and I couldn't live with that. So I bit my tongue and smiled when Trevor's mother complimented the roast. I laughed softly when Amanda joked about new wives learning fast, and I pretended not to notice the sideways glances, the coded words, the unspoken agreement that I was simply another pawn in their game. But then came the whisper that changed everything. That night, after the toast, Trevor's sister leaned toward me again, her breath warm against my ear. "At least you're holding out longer than the last one did," she murmured. The last one. Again. My heart skipped. I forced my face to stay still, my glass raised. But later, when I was alone, I searched. I dug through records, through old news clippings, through whispers on forgotten forums, and what I found made my blood run cold. Trevor had been married before, briefly. The marriage had ended in scandal, but no one spoke of it now. His ex-wife had disappeared from their social circles, her name erased from conversation. But the traces were still there. Legal filings, bankruptcy notices, property foreclosures. Piece by piece, I pieced it together. Trevor's family hadn't just isolated her. They had destroyed her. They forced her into bankruptcy, stripped her of everything she had, and left her with nothing but debt. And suddenly, Amanda's cruel whisper wasn't just cruelty. It was history repeating itself. I wasn't the first target, and if I didn't act, I wouldn't be the last. Once I learned what happened to Trevor's ex-wife, My fear transformed into something sharper: anger. If they had destroyed one woman before me, they would try again. But this time, I wouldn't fold. I wouldn't vanish quietly. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. They thrived in shadows, in whispers, in contracts written behind closed doors. If I wanted to survive, I had to fight on their terms. That meant collecting proof. So I began recording. At first, it was simple. I slipped my phone into my purse during family dinners, letting it capture the edges of conversation. The laughter, the mocking comments about bloodline, the constant references to my grandmother's trust. Each clip was small, but together they began to paint a picture of intent. But I needed more, something undeniable. I reached out to a private investigator, someone a friend from work recommended. His name was Daniel, and he had the kind of quiet, steady voice that made you believe he had seen everything already. I told him about the emails, the necklace, the whispers. He didn't blink. He just nodded and said, "If half of this is true, they've been at it a long time." Daniel began digging. Weeks passed, and I lived in constant tension, smiling at dinners, pretending to sleep beside Trevor, holding my breath every time the phone buzzed with updates from Daniel. One evening, he called me to meet him in a small cafe downtown. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, photocopies of records, things I never would have found on my own. "Trevor's father," Daniel said, "has a history. He's been tied to multiple cases of forgery. Each time, the paper trail leads to inheritances, women who married into the family and lost everything. Your ex-sister-in-law wasn't the first either. There were others, quiet settlements, bankruptcies that seemed to come out of nowhere. He's careful, but not perfect." My stomach turned as I flipped through the pages. Names, dates, legal signatures that looked eerily similar, a pattern stretching back years. But then, Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping. "The most important thing isn't Trevor's father. It's Amanda." I froze. "Amanda." He nodded. "She's not just a cousin hanging around the edges. She's listed as the executor of the Miller Family Trust. That means she doesn't just know about the inheritance. They run it through her. Every move, every transfer, every document goes through Amanda's hands. She's not a bystander, Rachel. She's at the center of it." The room tilted around me. Amanda, the smirking cousin with my grandmother's necklace, the one who whispered about the last one. She wasn't just cruel. She was powerful. It explained everything. The confidence, the way the family deferred to her, the way Trevor spent late nights whispering in the barn. Amanda wasn't just in on it. She was pulling strings. I closed the folder, my hands trembling. "So they're all in this together." Daniel's eyes were steady. "Yes, and if you don't move carefully, they'll strip you bare, just like the women before you." That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred through my windshield. My mind was racing. I had proof now, fragments at least, but it wasn't enough to stop them yet. Still, one thing had become terrifyingly clear. The cousin who mocked me, who wore my grandmother's necklace, wasn't just a nuisance. She was the key to everything. By the time the next family dinner arrived, I knew what I had to do. For months, I had played their game, smiling, nodding, pretending not to hear the barbs hidden in their words. But now, armed with Daniel's findings and my own recordings, I was ready. Still, my heart trembled as I dressed for the evening. I chose a soft blue dress. Nothing bold, nothing that might signal a fight. I brushed my hair down, slipped on plain earrings, and rehearsed my mask of compliance. Tonight, I had to appear small, unthreatening, exactly the Rachel they thought they had broken. When I entered the dining room, The familiar oak table gleamed under the chandelier. Plates were already set, wine poured, and the family's chatter hummed like static. Trevor pulled out my chair, his hand brushing mine. I smiled faintly, though inside a storm raged. The meal began as it always did, his father carving meat with precision, his mother offering polite but cutting remarks about society, Amanda leaning back in her seat with that knowing smirk. "Rachel," Amanda said sweetly, "you've been so quiet lately. Adjusting, are you?" Her necklace, the one that belonged to my grandmother, caught the light. My chest tightened, but I forced a nod. "Yes, I'm learning." The table chuckled softly, as if my submission were a private joke. As the night went on, the wine loosened their tongues. Conversations drifted, masks slipped. I kept my eyes down, but my recorder, hidden beneath the napkin in my lap, captured everything. Trevor's father raised his glass, voice booming. "The papers are nearly ready. Soon the trust will be secured, just as we planned. Bloodline first, as it has always been." Amanda leaned in, her eyes glinting. "And Rachel will understand eventually. They all do." Laughter followed. Trevor clinked his glass against Amanda's, his smile easy, his shoulders relaxed. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face still. Then, slowly, I set down my fork. My hands no longer trembled. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, even, so different from the timid silence they expected. "You should have remembered," I said softly. "This house has thin walls." The room froze. Forks clattered against plates. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Amanda's smirk faltered. Trevor's head snapped toward me, his face pale. "What did you say?" I folded my napkin neatly, laying it across my plate. My heart thundered, but my voice stayed steady. "Every word you've spoken, every plan you've made, every toast to bloodlines, I've recorded it. And Daniel, my investigator, has traced the forgeries, the bankruptcies, the inheritances you stole. All of it has already been shared with my attorney and with the state investigator." The silence was deafening. Trevor's father's face darkened, his jaw clenching. "You don't know what you're talking about." But his denial sounded weak, hollow. I met his gaze. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. You've been doing this for years. Women before me, lives destroyed, and you thought I'd fold too." Trevor finally found his voice, his words sharp with panic. "Rachel, stop. You don't want to do this. We can work this out." I turned to him, my heart breaking, even as I spoke. "Work this out? Trevor, I was your wife, and you chose to betray me for money, for them." Amanda slammed her glass down, wine spilling across the table. "You think anyone will believe you? You're nothing. You're just an outsider." I leaned forward, my voice cutting through her rage. "Maybe, but outsiders can still shine light into dark places. And now, Amanda, you're not just a cousin. You're the executor of the trust. Every fraudulent move traces back to you. Tell me, how long do you think your family loyalty will protect you when investigators start asking questions?" Her face drained of color. For the first time, I saw fear ripple across the table. Trevor's mother's hand trembled as she set down her fork. His father's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Trevor couldn't meet my eyes. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back. "You underestimated me. That was your mistake." No one stopped me as I walked toward the door. The air behind me was thick with shock, with the unraveling of a family that had believed itself untouchable. But as I reached the hallway, I felt Trevor's hand brush my arm. His whisper followed me, desperate and trembling. "Rachel, please, don't do this." I looked back at him, at the man I had once loved, and for the first time, I saw him clearly, Not a husband, not a partner, but a conspirator who had chosen his family's greed over my trust. I pulled my arm free. It's already done. And then I walked out, leaving behind the echo of their silence in the storm that was about to break over them all. The days after that dinner unfolded like a storm rolling across the horizon. Slow at first, then crashing with thunder that shook everything. I stayed in a hotel downtown, away from Trevor's house, away from the fortress I had once mistaken for family. Each night, I checked my phone compulsively, waiting for updates from Daniel, from my attorney, from the investigator I had trusted with everything. I barely slept, but I felt more awake than I had in months. For the first time, I wasn't surviving in silence. I was fighting back. It didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, the first subpoenas were issued. The authorities had enough evidence from the recordings, the emails, and Daniel's documentation to begin tearing through the Miller family's carefully built facade. I'll never forget the morning I watched the news. Cameras swarmed outside the Miller family business, an old stone building downtown that had once been a symbol of power. Reporters shouted questions as men in suits carried boxes of files out the doors. Indictments for fraud. The headlines read, "Forgery ring linked to inheritance schemes." My phone buzzed with messages. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months sent me screenshots, their texts filled with shock. Some didn't know the details. They only knew the Miller name, the prestige, the wealth. No one suspected what I had lived inside. Now the truth was out, and the world was watching. Trevor's father was charged first. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Amanda followed soon after, her role as executor making her central to the entire scheme. The necklace, the documents, the signatures, it all pointed to her. For years, she had pulled strings, and now the strings had become a noose. And Trevor, my husband, wasn't spared. The investigators uncovered his emails, his quiet complicity, the way he had positioned himself to inherit once I was drained of everything. His betrayal wasn't just moral. It was criminal. I was granted an annulment under fraud. My marriage, which had once felt like the promise of belonging, was legally declared void. What shocked me most was not the paperwork or the court hearings. It was the emptiness I felt when it was done. I had already mourned my marriage long before the law erased it. But through it all, one thing remained untouched. My grandmother's trust fund. Every dollar was protected, secured under my name. For the first time, I understood what she meant when she said money wasn't love, but it was freedom. That inheritance wasn't just about wealth. It was about choice, about never being forced to bow to those who would control me. When the dust began to settle, people asked me if I felt victorious, if I felt revenge had been served. I didn't know how to answer. Yes, the Miller family had fallen. Yes, their empire was fractured, their reputation shredded. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like survival. It felt like breath in lungs that had been suffocated too long. And Trevor, sometimes I still see his face in my dreams. The way he whispered, "Please, don't do this," as though I hadn't already given him every chance to stand by me. Betrayal by a spouse cuts deeper than any wound. But betrayal by an entire family? That's a scar you carry forever. So I ask you this. Which betrayal cuts deeper? When one person deceives you, or when an entire family conspires against you? For me, the answer doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I survived, that I walked away with my dignity, my freedom, and the reminder that love cannot be built on lies. My grandmother used to say that forgiveness is the heaviest gift you can give yourself, not for them, but for you. And though I will never forget what the Miller family tried to do. I choose to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Hate can consume a life, but love for yourself, love for the people who truly see you, can build a new one, and that is the life I intend to live.